that do other things. And Mel, in terms of an artist, is a writer of his own work, but he's also very well known as a critic and articles, the writer of main books, curator sometimes, been involved with the gallery recently. Everything really, he says. I've known Mel from, well, early 80s, something like that, very much as part of the art world. So it wasn't until I got to the AA and got to know Bruce McLean a bit more and Will Alsop that I saw the connection that Mel has. So, great mind, lover of words, and he's going to take over now.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? Very well. Does this one work? If I should want to use it for dramatic effect. Good. A slightly hyper state. I had a rather extraordinary week. Distray. This afternoon, yesterday I was at a funeral which I spoke from somebody very, very close, and this does make for odd displacements. This afternoon I photocopied a lot of things that I intended to read here tonight, things of my own, and when I got to Green Park, intending to sort them out quickly, I discovered that I'd left them on the kitchen table. So that's the sort of state. Doesn't matter because I've got plenty of stuff, and your library has admirably furnished me with certain things that I had left at home. I think, in a way, what I want to do is to say something about what I try to do as a writer. And what it means, in a sense, to me. What I'm going to do is to make a number of propositions, I suppose. The first is that there are many, many ways in which one can write about art, and that these ways may all, in their different ways, prove illuminating and help us to understand, or I think understand is the wrong word, help us to experience what art has to offer. Same is true, I think, of architecture. I may contradict myself on a number of occasions, I may not, I don't know. If I do, I always remember Whitman's great words, do I contradict myself? Very well. I contradict myself. I contain multitudes. I'm not particularly worried about that. I'm not worried about inconsistencies. What I am most deeply concerned about is the centrality of art to human experience. For me, it is the definitive human activity. It is the human being acting, I think, at the highest level of being human. I make that as my first proposition, if you like. So, let's start. I wrote something odd the other day, which was for myself and nobody else, and I'm going to read that because it's apropos, I think. The limits of my language are the limits of my world, wrote Wittgenstein, as you will know. This is what I wrote. There is no meaning in a work of art. There is only meaning in the receiving intelligence, in me, you. That is, meaning is found in the reception of the work. That is to say, in predication, me is the object of the sentence that begins with I. This meaning is not fixed. It is a negotiation of the work and with the work. Note well, not with the author of the work, who cannot be said to exist in the work. This is not to suggest that the reception is purely subjective. On the contrary, it is the only truly objective element in the transaction. It is embodied, that is to say, it finds its objectivity in language. This language is the objective medium of exchange, giving meaning to the world otherwise bereft of it. The dynamic of these exchanges in language constitutes reality, a reality which is communicable and therefore shared. All this constitutes an absolute subversion of the bourgeois presumptions and assumptions regarding the dynamics of the work of art in the world. I'll come back to the work of the work and how the work works. The bourgeois insistence upon the subjective I, the intentional creator, is an insistence upon ownership of meaning and power over their dispersals in the world. It is an insistence upon determination and fixity of categories. The bourgeois critic, the servant of his class, fears the flux of language, its volatility, fears category confusion, the formlessness of things. I have always regarded my work as a writer as political, but looking through my work, I think most people would find that an odd thing to say. And what I've just said, in a way, I've tried in a way, and I'll come back to this, to indicate why I think I've already, in a sense, defined the political nature of art by placing it so importantly at the centre of human activity. Anyway, this makes me think of something else. I was asked, one of the things I was asked that I might do was to do what's called my Dada performance or my Schwitters performance, and I said, well, I've done it several times and don't think I'm going to do it again, but you're going to get a little bit of it now because I find it, again, apropos to what I've just said and what I have been trying to say. I want to read you a poem because that makes sense of what I read afterwards. This is a poem by Schwitters called Anna Bloom. No, what do I want anything? What? No, I'm happy with that. I will put the lights down at the end when I get round to showing a handful of slides that I brought, if I get that far. Anna Bloom. Oh, beloved of my 27 senses, I love your, you, thee, you, your, I, your, you, my, we. This belongs, by the way, somewhere else. Who are you, uncounted female? You are you? People say you are. Let them say on. They don't know what it's all about. You wear your hat upon your feet and walk around on your hands. Upon your hands you walk. Hello, your red dress sewn up into white pleats. Red, I love Anna Bloom. Red, I love your, you, thee, you, your, I, your, you, my, we. This belongs, by the way, in Icy Fire. Red Bloom, Red Anna Bloom. What do people say? Prize question. 1. Anna Bloom has a bird. 2. Anna Bloom is red. 3. What colour is the bird? Blue is the colour of your yellow hair. Red is the cooing of your green bird. You simple girl in a simple dress, you dear green beast. I love your, you, ye, you, your, I, your, you, my, we. This belongs, by the way, in the burning grate. Anna Bloom, Anna, A, N, N, A. I trickle your name drips like soft as tallow. Do you know, Anna? Do you know already? You can also be read from behind. And you, the loveliest of all, you are from behind as you are from the front. A, N, N, A. Tallow trickles caressingly down my back. Anna Bloom, you trickle beast, I love your... Kurt Schwitters fled from Nazi Germany. He went to Norway, then he came to England, and I'm very glad to say that for a while he lived in Barnes, where I live, and where Bruce lives as well, Bruce McLean, my dear friend. In fact, it was one of the great surprises of his life when I took him down the suburban street, Westmoreland Road, to show him where Schwitters had lived. He didn't know this, and we planned a plaque of our own devising, but in fact the old LCC or whatever it was got there before us with a blue one, and there it is. And then Schwitters went characteristically from Westmoreland Road to Westmoreland itself, where, as you all know, he died. Poor and exiled. When he died, a marvellous man called Stephen Temerson, a filmmaker, artist, married to Anna Temerson, a beautiful artist, made a marvellous book. Temerson's ran a thing called Gababocus Press, and they produced very beautiful books. And they made one called Kurt Schwitters in England. And in it, Temerson wrote this about Schwitters. And this helps, I think, finally to define and to place what I mean by the political. This was written by Stephen Temerson, remembering his friend Schwitters. For us today, it may seem perhaps that the act of putting two innocent words together, the act of saying, blue is the colour of your yellow hair, is an innocent aesthetic affair. That the act of putting together two or three innocent objects, such as a railway ticket and a flower and a bit of wood, he's thinking obviously of Schwitters' Mertz works, of Schwitters' collage constructions. You may think that putting these things together, he says, is an innocent aesthetic affair. Well, it is not so at all. Tickets belong to railway companies, flowers to gardeners, bits of wood to timber merchants. If you mix these things together, you are making a havoc of the classification system on which the regime is established. You are carrying away people's minds from the customary modes of thought. And people's customary modes of thought are the very foundation of order, whether it is the old order or the new order. And therefore, if you meddle with the customary modes of thought, then, whether you are Galileo or Giordano Bruno with their funny ideas about motion, or Einstein with his funny ideas about space and time, or Schoenberg with his funny ideas about the black and white keys of the keyboard, or the Cubists with their funny ideas about shapes, or Dadaists or Metzists with their funny ideas about introducing symmetries and rhythms instead of principles, you are, whether you like it or not, in the very bowels of political changes. Hitler knew it, and that is why Kurt Schwitters was kicked out of Germany. Well, one could go on in that vein, I suppose, but I'm going to change. I'm going to read something very quickly about language, again, which I wrote not that long ago, because I think language is the heart of everything that I do as a writer, and mind manifests itself in the word, but not, as we know from experience, exclusively. Language makes thought possible, but the mind that it creates is freed thereby to reach for that which lies beyond language. This is the supreme paradox of human creativity, for we know that language, for all its splendor, is limited, and the ambitions of positivism to assimilate knowledge to wisdom, to arrogate to the rational mind all that need be known, were vain. Wittgenstein, the most gifted logician of his age, acknowledged this in the superb final propositions of Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. My propositions, he wrote, are elucidatory in this way. He who understands me finally recognizes them as senseless. When he has climbed out through them, on them, and over them, he must, so to speak, throw away the ladder after he has climbed up on it. He must surmount those propositions. Then he sees the world rightly, whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. The artist makes his work, or her work, in Wittgenstein's silence. Through art and its objects, its things in their silent thingness, we may apprehend or glimpse something of that which language cannot encompass. This is of course true also of music, which begins and ends in silence and fills space with physical vibrations, acting upon the mind through their actions upon certain organs of the inner ear. And of the language of poetry, it too works beyond the discursive, through the somatics of rhythm and sound, by its intensifications and fracturings of sense, in its reach outwards towards the objects of metaphor, its discovery of the hidden meaning of things, its apprehension of the sign in the object. So, as a person who uses language and writes a great deal, I'm saying there that I know perfectly well that what art offers is in its own way beyond the reach of language. And that is why it is necessary, and that is why it is not language. Okay. Oh, I'm pleased with this piece, so I'll read it. I'll read it because it follows on in a sense. It's in the notion that one of the things one has to do when confronted with certain work is to try to tease out the philosophy of it, to try to tease out what it's doing, but not to damage it by explanation. This is a review I wrote some time ago in Art Monthly, and it was of a show I saw in Edinburgh. And it was a show which, when I went to see it and I was going to write about it, I was somewhat nonplussed by it. It was by a brilliant young American artist called Spencer Finch. And he had two works. I'm going to read what I wrote about one of them. This work consisted of 100 pieces of paper, all identical size, I think, so A5. In the center of each was a simple elliptical shape of a pink, like that. And they were pinned together, next to each other, everyone abutting the next, all round the gallery, at about eye level. That was all the work consisted of. The work was called Trying to Remember the Colour of Jackie Kennedy's Hat. And they were all different pinks, every one. So it was like a work which was like the first impression was rather like those sort of, samples for nail varnish or whatever. And this is what I wrote. The Admirable Collective Gallery in Cockburn Street presented Trying to Remember the Colour of Jackie Kennedy's Hat. Jackie Kennedy's pillbox hat is the more like it. The first solo show by the New York-based artist Spencer Finch. Finch's ideas and the elegant and necessary minimality of their realizations have to do with the poignancies of subjectivity and with the associated problematics of the perception, memory, and representation of facts and events in the received world. Finch is well aware that these actualities are infinitely diverse and more complexly mediated than either post-Foucauldian cultural politics or conventional wisdom might suppose. There is no perception, just a constant process of translation between language and visuality, presence and absence, and I guess my work belongs precisely to this interface. Finch's words. Trying to remember the colour of Jackie Kennedy's pillbox hat consists of 100 pastel drawings pinned edge to edge in a continuous line at eye level around the gallery. Each consists of an elliptical colour specimen of a shade of pink, each subtly different from the others, like those in a colour chart for lipsticks or nail varnishes, each making the attempt at accuracy more delusive. In what sense is this effort, this deliberate plasticizing of an isolated aspect of a trivial object at a big event? Of course, the hat he's referring to is the hat Jackie Kennedy was wearing when Kennedy was shot, and which she's wearing when you know those extraordinary scenes when you see her crawling over the back of the car, if you remember. She's wearing a little pillbox hat. In what sense is this effort, as I said, an act of remembering or of trying to remember? If one of the tries were indeed the right colour, how would we know? The pillbox hat is, of course, that worn by Jackie Kennedy in Dallas on November the 23rd, 1963. Everyone, they say, remembers what they were doing when they heard the news. But what is it they remember? Spencer Finch is too young to remember, but he's seen the video, no doubt, as we all have. Perhaps he's trying to remember the colour as it registered on the video coverage he once saw. I remember the video as it happens only in black and white. And if you had actually been at Dallas near enough to see the action caught up in the shocked spasm of fear and horror at that fateful moment, what would you remember? The colour of Jackie Kennedy's pillbox hat? You might. It is just such arbitrary and inconsequential things that stick in the mind. But how could you be sure that what you remember was the true colour of the hat, or that it was any truer than Finch's memory of the screen image colour of the hat? Reflections on the experience of this work of Finch's revolve around those questions prompted by the material actuality of the work, and different in kind from that purely conceptual or theoretical question, what was the colour of Jackie Kennedy's hat? The answer to that is pink. It is colour out there in the world, a perceived property of an object, and its meaning, pink, can only be realised externally in the world and internally, aperceptively, in the mind, as such a property, in contradistinction to other properties of other objects. Finch provides just such contradistinctions, and the occasion for agreement about the unfixed actuality of pinkness and the usefulness of the provisional concept. By way of a humorous paradox, the piece is about an idée fixe, a kind of obsession. That it was that hat worn on that day raises many other questions, of course, about our memory of the event and its complex and fleeting images, in which the pinkness of the hat was an incidental detail in itself of no significance, great or small. Or shall we say, of no greater significance than that of the pretty hat, betokening no anticipation of sorrow that so intensifies our sense of the suffering of Picasso's Weeping Woman. Well, I was sort of pleased with that piece because it doesn't actually give sort of anything away. It just leaves the questions that the work asks in the air, but sort of asks questions around the questions. And that's a great deal of what I think one is trying to do when one is writing about art. I talk about myself, not about a lot of other people who write about art, whose work I find irritating, to say the least sometimes. I wrote a piece about this only recently. Art Monthly, February. It's a review of 4 books, which are all right, but not very good, or at least they fail in a way that I tried to put my finger on. That doesn't matter. This is what matters. Art is not instrumental. It is not, in David Jones' useful term, utile. Jones opposed the sacramental sign in art to the use of practical objects. A point made with paradoxical economy by Duchamp with the concept of the reciprocal ready-made, that is to say, a Rembrandt used as an ironing board. Secondly, because art is not abstract but concrete, its meanings realized through what Lawrence Weiner, as precise as ever, termed receivership. We're back to this very first thing, that in fact art's meaning is something that we make when we encounter it. It's not something that I can hand on to anybody, however useful my writing might prove to be to some. Its conceptual aspects constructed after aesthetic apprehension. Art is not discursive and not susceptible to understanding in the sense that a logical proposition or a historiographical theory might be. To explain the ideas in or behind or contained by a work of art in any medium, including words,
cannot substitute for the experience of the work itself, which in its true complexity is actually always beyond anything but incomplete and imperfect articulation. If this were not the case, we would not need art except as an illustrative embellishment to discursus, which in the work of some theorists, curators, critics, and art historians is what it seems to be. Art is not concerned with matters of opinion about things that may affect social and political events, but with the presentation of facts that in different ways may affect thought and feeling in the individual receiver and induce reflection upon the world. These reflections may turn upon implications that are phenomenological, epistemological, political, historical, topographical, and so on. The discourses, for there are many, to which they give rise are diverse, depending in each case upon the focus of the discussion and the circumstances in which it takes place. The true history of art is, foremost, a material history of objects and events. It integrates the description and appreciation of their apprehensible plastic realities as arrangements of matter, as light and colour, as movement and rhythm, interval and repetition, symmetry and asymmetry, coherence and fragmentation, etc., with the history of the events of their cultural reception, critical, ideological, commercial, social, economic. Over time, these aspects of reception will be determined by such matters as opinion and taste. There is no shortage of theory or of idealist historicism and abstracting dialectics in the academic discourse. But in the wider conversation, something else other than these formulae is required, a more direct engagement with the material realities of art, a recognition that the work of art is revelation and the effecting of change, first in the individual consciousness and then in the world at large. And I end with a rhetorical question. Is it too much to expect a popular writing of art in these terms to be possible? Well, it seems pretty difficult, but I don't think it's impossible. And I would hope sometimes my own writing actually meets that possibility. Some time ago, I was just about to drink my glasses. Some time ago, I wrote a little text for an exhibition which was based upon the notion of displacing works of art. In other words, not putting them in a gallery, but putting them elsewhere. So that you might encounter a work of art in a butcher's shop, say, or in the street, or in a local tailor's or something like that. It was a sort of nice idea. Whether it worked or not doesn't matter, but I was asked if I would write a text for this, and this is the text I wrote. A work of art is something that exists in the world. It takes its place along with all the other things that exist in the world. What it means depends upon where it is found in the world. What it means depends upon who is making the meaning, not the artist, except when the artist considers the work as anyone else might, encountering it as something that exists in the world. Meaning is made in the encounter. Placement determines the nature of the encounter. In what places do these encounters take place? Houses, gardens, galleries, museums, churches, streets, parks. A work of art is positioned. Its position is part of its meaning. We know where we are in a house, a gallery, a museum, a church, a street. We know why the art is there, or someone else who does know will tell us. Such people, critics, journalists, art historians, curators, guides, theologians, politicians, are paid to do it. And the more money they are paid, the more confidently will they tell us why the work of art is where it is. In such sanctioned places, the presence of a work of art is no surprise, as we are not surprised by a person in a house, a dealer in a gallery, a curator in a museum, a priest in a church, and a policeman in the street, though the work of art itself may surprise us. Its appropriate destination is inscribed in the work of art. Its destination is part of the artist's intention. But intentions are neither here nor there. The work of art has its own life as something that exists in the world. We may intend our children to be good, to be well educated, to be rich. We cannot make them so. What if we confound that intention, or ask the artist to forego that part of artistic intention that inscribes destination in the work? Readdress the work, change its identity. Displacement, surprise. Who is surprised? The artist, for a start. Then all those who know where art properly belongs and tell us why. Then those who encounter it as they go about their lives in the world, not expecting to encounter a work of art among all the other things in the world: bollards, fish, sewing machines, cats, manhole covers, tables, coffee spoons, newspapers, etc. We are changed by surprise. The world is not as we thought. Now, where am I? Yes. One of the things that has been very important to me in my life has been my friendship with artists and architects. One of them has many connections with this place. The other has had connections with this place. One of them is Will Alsop. The other is Bruce McLean. And I should be coming to work I've done with Bruce later on. But I want just to say something about Will Alsop. He was something I'd written about him was one of the things that I actually photocopied and left on my kitchen table. So I'll have to sort of improvise a little bit here. I've learned a great deal from Will over the years, usually in informal circumstances, drinking and talking and kitchen tables, the very kitchen table upon which his thing is left being one of them. And what I learnt, I suppose, mostly from him about architecture was to think of it as the site of behaviour. I have written, not a great deal, but I have written now odd things about architecture. And one of the things I've written is a very good book. It's in your library, it might even be in your bookshop, called National University Library, Ljubljana. There you are. Josef Plecnik, the great modern architects. In my view, unrecognised for his true greatness as yet. Well, I've done my little bit in writing this book about this extraordinary building in Ljubljana, which I was introduced to by a sculptor 8 or 9 years ago, I suppose, and then I suggested that someone should write a book about it, and Phaidon said, "Why don't you?" So I did. And it is the most extraordinary building, and I think, if I'm right, yes, there it is. It's an incredible building. It's brick, but it's sort of clad. We might take the lights down now for a moment, if someone can do that. It stands 4 square on an irregular plot close to the river. Obdurate, difficult sort of building, like a sort of blockhouse almost in some ways. I can't talk about it at length. That's something else. It's another lecture. But if I can find the passage I want to read to you. What I find irritating about a great deal of writing about architecture is that it is about objects, that it describes objects, and that it is illustrated often by photographs which are of objects, if you like. Often photographs of parts of the building taken from strange angles which you would never see and never experience. Whereas what interests me is
behaviour, and as I said, it was this almost obsessively came about through endless discussion with Will Alsop, and writing about him, with him and for him in various ways. So I'm going to just read a little bit from this book, which was found in your library for me. That's seen from a particular angle, but this is what we need to look at. This is the doorway, and this part is called the interior. And what I'm trying to do here is to somehow render in words the experience of the building and try to suggest why that experience is so special and how that experience relates to its physical aspects, its what we think of as its architectural aspects. Entry to the National and University Library is by way of a door hardly larger than that to a private house. The imposing portal, which is about 5 metres high and which sweeps out to occupy most of the pavement, does not prepare you for the intimacy of this entrance, which lets into a small lobby. The door is, in fact, you can see a little bright bit at the bottom part. Above it is a large window. This is a characteristic device or trope that Plecnik uses throughout the building. But the door is lower, and there's one little door to the right. There's a double door, but you only ever go through the right-hand door. That is why. It says, I'll read on, stop talking. This lets into a small lobby with a short flight of stairs up to a landing with doors to the entry office to the left and the cloakroom to the right, and a glass double door in front which is opened only rarely for ceremonial occasions. The user then proceeds to what is in effect a transverse corridor on the raised ground floor of the building. Turning obliquely to the right, you are now positioned at the foot. This is the door. This is the door handle, which is shiny from people using it. This is shows you the other one, which is hardly ever used, and as you can see is sadly rather beautifully tarnished. So you go through this door, which is like the door of a domestic house, and this is where you find yourself. You are now positioned at the foot of the central staircase, which is directly aligned with the front entrance. After the quiet rigmarole of entry and registration, it is an extraordinary moment. At this point, there is very little and no direct natural light. What there is appears to come from two sources: the window above the front door behind you and below you, and a square of brilliant light high above and ahead of you beyond the top of the staircase. This effect of a profound darkness is intensified by the black marble of the stairwell walls and of the huge columns barely discernible on the landing at the top. The structural ensemble of a staircase bridge from a ground level to a raised room, having symbolic purposes relating to the ascent from the quotidian to the plane of spirituality, occurs significantly in another building on which Plecnik was working at the time of the construction of the National Library. This building is a church just outside Ljubljana, and I won't go into a long description of it, which then follows. From the foot of the library staircase, the scholar, admitted now to what is clearly a temple dedicated to things of the mind and of the spirit, here identified by the architectural structuring of the user's experience, ascends, as in a ritual passage, from darkness to light, guided by the bright square, which is soon revealed as a window above the door into the reading room. It is a sign to what in this scheme of things is to be regarded as the inner sanctum, the place set aside for study, reflection, and contemplation. The willfully graduated separation of the reading room from the hurly-burly of quotidian life by means of an entry lobby, a ceremonial flight of stairs, and a landing is of course commonplace to grand library design from the Renaissance onward. I speak then of two other libraries, Saint-Geneviève in Paris and Asplen Stockholm libraries, examples of this. But behind it, I say, looms a greater antecedent, whose sombre and passionate mood suited Plecnik's heroic ambition for the National Library. It is the progenitive mannerism of Michelangelo's Laurentian Library, the dramatic anteroom
to the Laurentian Library, as tall and narrow as the shaft of a pit, in Pevsner's evocative phrase, which must certainly count as a major inspiration, especially in terms of the behavioral determinants of its spatial dynamics. It is spirit and mood, and most certainly not style, or most certainly not style, or architectonic arrangement that is to the point here. In terms of the latter, the extravagant triple flight open staircase that occupies the space of the Laurentian anteroom and the complex play of the room's decorative features have absolutely nothing in common with Plecnik's plain, dark, and enclosed stairwell. This rises to the horizontal lines of the landing edge on either side, which converge to meet the top of the staircase at sharp, acute angles to the ascending edge of the steps. We are forced to follow their pull upward first and then forward in a dynamic that conforms perfectly to what Pevsner, still writing of the Lorenziana, calls the chief spatial quality of mannerism, its tendency to enforce movement through space within rigid boundaries. Ascending the staircase in accord with this imperative, the user may be surprised at the ease with which the ascent is effected. There is an explanation for this, and it is indicative of the psychological subtlety that distinguishes Plecnik's design of detail and his acute sense of behavioral actuality in relation to architectural form, structure, and spatial disposition. The rises on the staircase are lower than might be expected, and the treads are generously deep. Their width, of course, is an indication of their ceremonial dignity. The effect is that in mounting these stairs, the user seems to float upward and forward at the same time, for the ascent is effected without the effort usual to such a climb, or such as might make the progress towards the light a struggle at precisely the moment when the spirit, released from the banalities of commonplace existence, should rise in expectation of a kind of grace. Its pale grey terrazzo gives the staircase a unified visual effect that is in sharp contrast to the differentiated complexity of its marble walls, and with characteristic attention to detail, the nosings end an inch or so from the point at which each step meets the black wall, creating a hard-angled edge to delineate the professional via. Well, I won't go on with all that, but I think the point I suppose I'm just making is that in writing about architecture, one seeks, again, not to describe necessarily, although I think there's a fair amount of technical description in that, the architectural detail, but to try to see how that detail, the height of a riser, for example, on the stairs, might actually affect the behaviour of the person rising through the stairs. The light at the top, of course, shines down, and the light below it, and what you have, the light from above is from clear-story windows, the other side of the library reading room, which is transverse. And so what you actually have, as you go up these stairs, you are pierced by an array of light which enters the library from one side and exits with the door behind you. Okay, time goes on, and I'll read a couple more things of another kind. Art, writing about art can enter art itself, be part of a work of art, and through collaborations with Bruce and with others, I have had the great good fortune to be able to work and make work. The latest book of this kind, artist book, that I've worked on is a book called Sight Unseen, which I made, in fact, with Terry Smith. I don't know if Terry's been here or spoken here. He's a marvellous artist, an extraordinary person, and you ought to invite him. Terry does some odd things. He goes into buildings that are just about to be destroyed or are derelict, generally inaccessible, and he makes... I haven't any slides. He makes... what's this? I think I'm going backwards, aren't I? Hang on a minute. I haven't got any slides of that. That's what you get to at the top.
of the staircase. That's why I should have gone on to it. It's a most extraordinary sort of hyperstyle. And this is looking back from the top of the stairs. That well, that dark, dark well, is in fact the well of the stairs. The door behind, the door you're looking at is not the door to the library at all, to the reading room. It's the door to an exhibition room. Anyway, well, I better go back from that a minute. In fact, you can turn it off for a second if you would. Anyway, this book called Sight Unseen came out of a collaboration with Terry Smith, and as I said, what he does, he then reveals. He cuts through into the walls and reveals underlayers and what have you, and often in particular sorts of configuration. This is one photograph here. You can see it from the wall. This is 3 floors, and as you can see, there are a number of openings into the wall there, and then fold it out, and then below. And this house is inaccessible, so the whole thing is based upon a photographic documentation, in the sense of the work he does in it. There's also one other marvellous thing which I must show you, which is this photograph. Again, I hope you can sort of see it, which is where Terry has cut away and revealed, the brick is revealed there and there, but in between are the builders of the lathes of the plasterer, the original plasterer. And as he pointed out to me, they in fact fit together because they would have been cut from the wood, from the plank, and delivered. All of the piece, and then each one will be taken off. So you actually have an extraordinary vertical reading, as it were, of the original plank. I wondered how I was going to write about this, and I then, talking to him, discovered, this is where I get a clue, run with it, that he'd been brought up in London in the post-war period, and that many of his most vivid memories were of bomb sites and houses where walls had been simply exposed, which never should have been exposed, and where bedroom wallpaper and things like that were visible to the street. And there was this period when you had this experience all over London, or certainly all over East London, which is where Terry comes from. I wrote a text. It's called Remembering. This is one of several texts in this book which relate to this whole thing. Sites of hiding, seeking, finding, keeping in mind what was before, bomb sites gave sight of what only private eyes in love and labour had seen. The everlasting wallpapers of childhood as forever fixed with their roses and flourishes in the world, as the hidden orchard behind a hedge with its perennial green apples, stolen and sour, every passing late summer, as the unchanging streets on the way to school, as the smell of creosote on wooden fences that splintered the knuckles, that discovered the percussion hidden in their overlapping repetition, just as the saw disclosed and the latticed rhyme of lathes hidden in the plank plied by the builder at his trade in Peckham High Road. Unchanging as the unweeded, blitzed spaces invaded by rosebay willow herb and inhabited close by St. Paul's and further east by black redstarts fooled by wildness, locations come into existence by virtue of the houses whose secret walls and stairways were exposed to weathers and eyes no longer private. Those inside-out spaces cleared by firestorm for new beginnings, new occupations by flower and bird, playing child, lovers, for new builders freeing the space for settlement and lodging, bringing the presencing of dwelling in which childhood ends and nothing lasts forever, being human on the earth as mortal. That last phrase comes from Heidegger, from whom I took a marvellous piece from an essay by Heidegger called Building, Dwelling, Thinking. And I'll read it to you because this is the Architectural Association. Bauen originally means to dwell, where the word bauen still speaks in its original sense, it also says how far the nature of dwelling reaches. That is, bauen, buen, bio are our word bin in the versions ich bin, I am, du bist, you are. The imperative form bis be. What then does ich bin mean? The old word bauen, to which the bin belongs, answers ich bin, du bist mean I dwell, you dwell. The way in which you and I am, the manner in which we humans are on the earth, is buan, dwelling. To be a human being means to be on the earth as a mortal. It means to dwell. Now, I can move on quickly. Could I have the next slide, please? I did a couple of... I'm not boring you, am I? Or am I? No. I did a work with Bruce recently called the Nautical Mile. This is a sculpture which consists of a long terrazzo pavement. It's a mile long. It's at Bridlington on the seafront on the promenade, and this long pavement has a poem or a set of texts that I wrote for it and which are cast into it. What you see there is a bit of "Oh, we do like to be beside the seaside," which is one of the beginning texts, and the promenade is in three sections basically, and it starts near the pier pavilion and the swimming pools and the harbour wall and so on, where you get all the seaside things happening, and it goes on to another section which is a slightly sort of sedate, and then it goes on to a thing called Pitt's Wall, which is a great gritstone bulwark built at the turn of the century at the expense of Mr. Pitt, a local businessman, which is an extraordinary sort of hard work, and it goes out into a sort of wildness, because the sands at Bridlington at that point then sweep round for about 30 miles. There's a couple of villages that touch them, but for about 30 miles until it reaches Stern Head, which is the great spit at the mouth of the Humber. There is nothing. So you move in this on this walk along this promenade, along this mile, you move from the sort of sociable, I do like to be beside the seaside bits, to this rather wild. And my text, I attempted to reflect this. I have to say something about this, which is sort of by the by, which is this. I gave a lecture some time ago, at the end of last year, in Glasgow, about sculpture in the city, and I didn't know how I was going to do it. I was in a terrible state, to be quite honest, like I was tonight, but only worse in some ways. And I got up at the morning before I left to go to Glasgow, still worrying about how I was going to do it, and I suddenly think everything came suddenly to me. I suddenly realized that there was a great deal of coherence in what I'd been interested in and been doing for some time, and that one of the coherences was to do with the business of walking, and that we experience the city walking, and that so much of what we experience as human beings has to do with the beat of your own feet upon the pavement or wherever, and that the great works of art of the century, of public art that have struck me, works by Plecnik, for example, works by Brancusi, the great terrazzo ensemble of the Table of Silence, the Gate of the Kiss, and the Endless Column, with a whole kilometre between. You know, if you want to experience that ensemble, you have to walk. And the walking is part of the experiencing of it as a work of art. And this did help me somewhat to begin to shape what I wanted to say in that lecture, which centered, as I said, a great deal around the notion of walking. And this, I realized, was part of that, and it was a marvelous thing to be able to do something which actually met the whole procession of walking from one part of the town to this rather wilder thing. And I'm going to read you a couple of little bits from this text. We can have another look. There it is. One of the things I do is simply name all the gulls that you're likely to see at At Bridlington, this was what I called the Lookup Factor. There are things there which you'd have to go back and look up, perhaps. What does this refer to? But nothing is inaccessible in this text. But the other thing was, of course, that constantly the text invites you to look up in the other sense and see what is actually there to be seen. So here is one bit. Frank and Fred Brown were the sons of Kit Brown, Christopher Brown, a fisherman who warned them. There's a lifeboat at Bridlington. They're very proud of it. And one night, towards the end of the last century, the boys went down to try to help a ship in danger, and the seas were so wild that Kit Brown himself, who was a great lifeboatman, said, "It's no point in trying it. Don't go." And he wouldn't go, and nevertheless they went. And they came back, and they got to the harbour wall, and he was down there waiting for them, and they got into difficulties. And Kit Brown pulled one son from the water, and then he pulled his second son, and in doing that he slipped himself and was drowned. When I went up to do some research on Bridlington, someone says, "You must do something about Kit Brown, please." And I said, "Right, I will." And I made a part of the text for Kit, and it's actually Kit Brown. It's actually in the pavement. There it is. Frank and Fred Brown, my Bridlington boys, full fathom 5 thy father lies, dragged into inchoate seas, those are pearls that were his eyes. Kit Brown, fisherman, lifeboatman, swift shore hero of 93, drowned by the harbour wall, reaching to save his own son in merciless seas, March 1898. So there's that sort of thing. And so it goes on, but I want to... that reference to the Swiftsure is picked up a bit later. November 1893, 5 aboard the Coble Swiftsure put out tonight at Nightingale Force 9, delivered the crew of the Victoria, amazing grace in impossible seas, and then to bed before the town awoke, amazed. Just, it goes on, stroll quickly, stroll slowly, walk quickly, jog gently, run swiftly. And then there are measurements as you go along. And as you get further along, the text gets more and more matching to what's actually happened. I'll read a couple bits more from the text. February the 10th, 1871, Bridlington's sea sorrow, 30 overloaded coal brigs and barks bound south from Tyneside, broken by seas in wild southeasterlies, 70 drowned in the Bay of Safety, which is what Bridlington is called. 1875, that is to say 2 years or 3 years later, the Plimsoll line became law. Too late for the seamen of the brig Delta of Whitby foundering off these sands, too late for the brave 6 of the lifeboat Harbinger upturned off here, their bodies cast upon this south sand shore, too late for the lost souls of the Margaret of Ipswich, the Arrow of Sunderland, the Lavinia of Seaham, the Teresita of Harwich, and many more lost in the great gale of 71. So, this is, for me, language entering art. And here's, towards the very end, it gets more and more sort of cosmic, and here we go. This is on the, this is the bit on the wild Pitts Wall, Belvedere Promenade it's called. And I think you'll see it picks up on some of the things I've been trying to say. And it picks up also here on the whole notion of the receiver making experience, and of art being something created in the receiving imagination. And it's here on a pavement in Bridlington, and I'm very pleased about that. Step after step after step, each stepping out a new line through space and time, pacing out the meter, measured feet, measured breath, to your own tempo, fast, slow, walking your own poem through salt air. At each pause, the bay composes into a new stanza of light, bright lines, parallels of silver, greys, blues and golds. Pause and the bay coheres at once, a momentary Gesamtkunstwerk, You are composer and conductor of the South Strand Opera on this North Sea shore. Your eyes create the scene, your ears hear the music, the sea's song and the helix of a shell, new every morning, every turning season as the sun rises over the eastern sea, midday with light above. Where land meets sea, evening as the sun sinks westward, landward stars scintillate over the dark North Sea, wheeling round Polaris above invisible Flamborough, with its phased light in south skies, Arcturus gleams. And there it goes on into that's the town bit, that's the crowded bit. Go as far as you can, pace yourself, meet yourself halfway. There's Bruce's Pier at the very end. And that's where you are exactly on the face of the earth at the very end of the walk. And this is what you see at that point. These fantastic skies and that great bay going round and round and round to Spurnhead. Okay, I'm hurrying forward now. Only this would work to do two more little things, if you don't mind. Here you are. Bruce made a show in Denmark and asked me to write texts for it. And I called the text 4 Texts for Paintings in 4 Rooms. And this was text very much to do with being in rooms and about the whole notion of positioning yourself in rooms, about the whole, in fact, one's behaviour in architecture. And so this is the first one. This is in the first room. It's called Invisible Grey, Invisible Blue, shades of grey buildings against grey skies, shades of blue buildings against blue skies, a succession of greys, a succession of blues, a procession of greys, a procession of blues. Notation 1, the measures, the intervals, 10 squares, 10 feet, 10 square feet, end to end, steps heel to toe, grey. Notation 2, the measures, the intervals, 10 squares, 10 feet, 10 square feet, end to end, 10 steps, heel to toe, blue. A square dance, grey. A square dance, blue. Notation 3, grey, blue, grey, grey, blue, blue, grey, blue, blue, grey, blue, grey, 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 blue, grey, blue, 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 grey. The dancers visible, the dance invisible, the dancer seen, the dance known, dance and dancer indivisible. This piece is called Pure White. Pavilion for nothing. 4 white columns, no podium, no pediment, no impediment. Nothing, silence, absence, invisibility. And this piece, I must read you the title of this piece so that you'll understand my response. This piece is called Nod, Nudge, Wave, Wag, Shake, Shrug, Point, Wink, Glance, Hint, Signal, Stand. And this is my text. It's called Sign, as in S-I-G-N, Sign City. In Sign City, every gesture, each subtle nuance, all seemingly invisible motions, slight indications, signals, any muet, tick, tic-tac, telltale flicker of expression, byplay, almost unseen dropping of jaw or batting of eyelid, unnoticed twitch of forefinger, crossing or uncrossing of legs, sniff, jiggle, incline of head, flexing of calf muscle, jut of chin, meaning look, expression of face, darkening of brow, hint of a smile, casual glance, almost imperceptible frown, rise of eyebrow, narrowing of eye, pursing of lips, tensing of shoulder, stiffening of lip, clench of teeth is registered. Read. Each fine shade of every possible meaning subject to nice, precise particularities of analysis, debriefed, every last intimation of possible indication of feeling, minute sensation, least stirring of a prompting to small actions, weakest impulse to feeble irresolutions of volition, velleity, veiled whisper of expression, merest accent of emphasis or de-emphasis is checked, matched against exhaustive gesture data, pose examples, position registers,
entered into manuals of manual motion, catalogued, coded, banked, ranked, measured in extent, searched for intent, content, portent, scrutinized, sounded, logged, its implications extrapolated to potential interactions, interphasings, interrelations, interlocutions, interrogations, inquisitions, inquiries, investigations, speculations, specializations, disputations, contentions, conventions. In Sign City, colour coding has been determined already for the grander, bolder, more expansive, highly expressive, unmistakably unambiguous four-square type of hint. Gesture, signalling, manoeuvre, waving, shaking, nudging, unsubtle positioning, pointing, gesticulating, shrugging, power play, posing, actions at a distance, reactions close at hand. Shades of grey are undergoing procedures of discrimination, nuance, analysis, classification, categorization, codification, and ratification as mood indicatives. Nicety of meaning distinguishes, deviation of feeling measures, redundancy registers. In Sign City, no move will go unnoticed. Every gesture will be understood. Everything exists to become a sign of something else in Sign City. And finally, a couple of years later, I asked Bruce to make a show at a gallery I was curating some shows there for a summer, and this was up in South Shields. Bruce is a great reciter, as you can see, of imagery, and he made this extraordinary piece which picked up this gallery has a window opening onto the Tyne. Very beautiful light comes in this window, and when Bruce came up to look at the space, he was completely knocked out when he looked out of the window across the Tyne to a great blue shed, a shipbuilding shed, bright blue, and he said, you can't fart against stand-up. You can't really beat that when it comes to a sculptural object. And he, anyway, made this piece, and this piece, every single colour, looking from the window at the day that he'd made it, finally got it up there, I looked out of the window, and every single colour in the piece, I saw outside. Either ships painted it, or there were sheds, or whatever. The only one didn't, that I thought was never going to be, was that sort of strange burgundy red you might see towards the far end. I thought, well, we're never going to see anything like that. And as I said it, a tanker painted precisely that burgundy colour from bow to stern, chugged up the Tyne. So there you have it. Artists predict all sorts of things. Now, this was one piece, and what I did, at Bruce and we did a piece together, and I wrote, which I haven't got a slide of, but on this board is a text, and it's the last text I'm going to read. A text in which I attempted to say something in a way that was part of the work, but was somehow, for people of South Shields, there's not a great art public up there, not a sophisticated art public like what we got in London, and I wrote a text, and this is the text I wrote, and it sort of sums up, I think, some of the other things I've been trying to say about how language can be part of, enter art, how language can be used to make art in some ways accessible to the receiving intelligence without trying to dominate that intelligence, without trying to impose meaning. It's called, hasn't got a title, but on the wall it was done straight on the wall, with those thingamybobs when they rub it down and so on. It looked very nice, and it was blue, but the word "the work" was in red throughout. There it is. The work is what you see. The work is what you think when you see the work. The work is what you think when you think about the work. The work is what you see when you think about the work. The work is made of painted steel. The work answers to no one. The work speaks to everyone. The work is not conservative. The work is not grey. The work is not black and white. There are no grey areas. The work looks forward. The work looks back. The work is here and now. The work belongs nowhere else. The work is potential. The work is what you make it. The work includes the blue shed across the river. The work comprehends the river. The river is the best part of the work. The work is a shout across the river. Every boat is a part of the work. The work is the longest painting on Tyneside. The work reaches the far bank. Invisible bridge. The work begins here. The work ends where you want it to end, when you want it to end. The work is an horizontal, endless column, a beam. The work is a fixed, physically portable mentally. The work is a concept. The work is an object. The work is abstract. The work is real. The object of the work is to bridge the gap between thinking and seeing. The work contains the other works. The work is reflective. The work is a work of art. The work is the work of art. The work of art is to extend the imagination. The work of art is to cross the river when it comes to it. Without art, no bridge, no boat. Without imagination, no river, no source, no mouth, no meaning, no metaphor. The work is a section of a line that encircles the earth. The work has no end. You will forget this work. You will not forget this work. You are part of this work. These statements are part of this work. Thank you.
Well, I hope everyone's enjoyed it as much as I have. I think it's been a fantastic treat to hear your words, not just the words that most of us get perhaps when we read Art Monthly or some of the books, but the fact that the treats from the exhibitions. Certainly I'm not used to the readings like that. I think also for the architects that are here, or the architectural students, I hope that they will occasionally have put the word architecture in instead of art, because I think a lot of what we do here and other places, it's very relevant what Mel has been talking about. I can just think of mapping projects and think of some of the things that Mel's done for us, so thank you.